This video was written before the death of beloved icon Akira Toriyama. He was a hero to many, including myself. Dragon Ball was a series I bonded with my siblings over, and it has had a deep impact on me over the course of my life. The legacy of Akira Toriyama cannot be overstated. From helping establish new genre-defining tropes to casually shaping pop culture as a whole. Thank you, Toriyama, for not just changing my life, but the lives of millions. I have a problem with the moon. No, not the moon in real life. I'm talking about the moon in Dragon Ball Z, that moon. My problems with the real life moon will have to wait for a future video. Today I'm here to talk about how the moon in Dragon Ball makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Starting off our journey in order to try to fix the fear and confusion the moon holds over me, let's look at the history of the moon in Dragon Ball. So obviously, the first thing we're going to cover on this video about the moon in Dragon Ball actually didn't happen in Dragon Ball. Age, -75 million. Let's talk about one of Akira Toriyama's older series, Dr. Slump. This is when the moon was created. Now, during one of the events in Dr. Slump, a talking clock takes a little girl back in time on a magic school bus-esque ride. She headbutts an asteroid out of the way, and that's how the moon's created. We literally owe Orale from Dr. Slump for saving the dinosaurs and giving us the moon. Also, fun fact, this is around the time when Beerus would seal our supernatural grandfather in the Z-Sword until it got broken by some clowns. Age? Sometime before 740, I think. I don't know. Since Dr. Slump and Orale are canonical to the Dragon Ball universe, we can't just ignore everything else that happens to the moon in that series. Because the moon displays way more weird things. To begin with, as we just heard, the moon started off as a head-butted asteroid, but asteroids are small, typically. The moon's pretty big. Turns out what happened is it got shot by a big small ray and got way bigger. I think it's 100 times bigger is how big the big small ray lets you go. In around chapter 23 or something of Dr. Slump, Orale goes from moon creator to moon destroyer and literally tosses a pebble at the moon and fucking obliterates it. Which, I'd like to point out that Master Roshi, in the future, has to go max power and do his biggest Kamehameha yet. And it destroys the moon. But Orale does it with a pebble? I don't know, power scalers. Gonna have to explain that one somehow. Age 749. During the Emperor Pilaf saga, or somewhere around it, we see Goku take the rabbit mob up to the moon using his power pole and dooms them to an eternity of making mochi in the vacuum of space. And while this might sound horrible enough, we're gonna go on to see that the moon's gonna get broken a few times, and we never really get an update on what happens to them. I think at some point, Toriyama stated that when the moon blew up, they just went adrift into space, which one means that they survived the Kamehameha, which is wild. But two, they can survive in the vacuum of space because apparently they just go adrift until the moon gets brought back, at which point they find their way back to the moon. Age 750. During the 21st Budokai Tenkaichi, aka the Strongest Under the Heavens tournament, Goku ends up seeing the full moon and turning into a great ape. In order to stop this, Master Roshi goes max power and unleashes the most intense Kamehameha we have seen up until this point in the series, completely obliterating the moon. This does have an unintended side effect of the poor Wolfman forever being stuck in his wolf form because there's no more full moon to look at. Age between 750 and 756. In between the 21st and 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, Kami removes Goku's tail so he's able to bring back the moon, However, it's not really stated specifically how the moon's brought back, and I think if they had used the Dragon Balls to bring back the moon, that it would mess with wishes they have to make later, but I may be wrong on that. Feel free to call me out in the comments. Age, around 762. After seeing the moon, Gohan goes into his great ape form, much like his father before him, and starts an absolute rampage. Piccolo, seeing this, decides probably not a good idea to let the monkey boy just rampage. So he goes above and beyond to stop it. He blows up the moon, again, although this is kind of retconned later, and I will talk about that in a second. And on top of that, he also removes Gohan's tail, keeping him from ever transforming again. Age 762 to 764. The moon is yet again restored off-screen. Again, we're not really sure how. In my opinion, it was probably using Namek's Dragon Balls, because they have a shorter cooldown and 3 wishes, so it would probably be a lot easier for us to get them to fix our moon than for us to fix our moon. Whatever the case may be, in between Piccolo blowing it up and the arrival of Mecha Frieza and his father, the moon's just back, and I guess the rabbits are probably back with it, because they're intrinsically tied to the moon at this point. You know, actually, the moon being like kind of living and it coming back all the time but not always being explained, the moon might be a god. Okay, so those are a lot of the bullet points of the history of the moon and the weird stuff it's been involved in. I mentioned that there was a weird retcon with Piccolo and his destruction of the moon. In Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, the game, it says that Piccolo created an illusion of the moon being destroyed to stop Gohan, which I think only raises more questions than it does give answers. Now, let's get into the other aspects of the moon and the weird implications they bring about. The weird things the moon does and doesn't do. The first one I want to address is an inconsistency between the moon in Dragon Ball and the moon in real life. As in, it seems like when the moon goes missing in Dragon Ball, the tides aren't affected on Earth, and it seems that not much else is affected on Earth. Let's talk about one of the more interesting things the moon can do. It can transform humans and aliens alike. That might sound weird, but I mean, as discussed earlier, werewolves and such are straight up a part of Dragon Ball, and as a result, their transformations are tied to the moon, just like in any mythology. However, humans with lycanthropy are not the only creatures that have transformations tied to a full moon. That's right, the Saiyan race is basically just space werewolves? I mean, I'm not really that far off either. When they observe the full moon, they go into their form whether they want to or not. However, it is clear that the reaction that takes place for a lycanthrope to transform versus a Saiyan to transform is very different. When you remove the moon from view for a lycanthrope, it stays in whatever form it was in at the time. However, when you remove it for a Saiyan, they cut their transformation. They go back to normal. So there's something inherently different between the two transformations, even though there are a lot of similarities. Another odd thing to note is it seems like artificial sources can also be used to replace both of them. As we see in an earlier episode, Roshi hypnotizes and tricks Wolfman into thinking that Krillin's head, his shiny ball head, is in fact the moon, which causes Wolfman to turn back into a human. Also, when we see some Saiyans transform, they can do it artificially. Vegeta was able to do it in the Saiyan Saga, created an artificial moon. And then the evil Saiyan in Super Dragon Ball Heroes, I think his name is Cumber. Yeah, Cumber does the same technique as well to go Golden Great Ape. So we can see that it can come from artificial sources, both hypnotically and key-based. Although that's not only it either, because we also see that Saiyans can be affected psychologically to an extent as well, if we take what Piccolo said in Kakarot as canon, because that means just the illusion of the moon no longer being there is enough to stop a Saiyan's transformation. Oh yeah, one last point. The moon generates radiation. Wait, what? Yeah, so the moon has its own weird radiation, and I've heard some people say that it doesn't count because it was only ever mentioned in GT. So I'd like to play this clip of Vegeta from the Saiyan Saga.
The moon merely reflects the rays of the sun, but as they're being reflected, a new energy called Blutz Wave is created and added to their composition. These waves cause the transformation, not the moonlight by itself, as you may have believed. Although moonlight is a natural source of Blutz Wave power, it is not the only way to form this energy. By channeling the energy from within ourselves and combining it with the planet's atmosphere, we can make a synthetic moon complete with Blutz Waves anytime and anywhere we want to!
Thanks, Vegeta. However, it's not until GT that we learn anything more about them, so I kind of understand that side of it. But, I mean, Vegeta talked about it right here. Come on. So, I've mentioned it, but what are Blutz Waves? As Vegeta mentioned, they're a unique form of radiation when sunlight is reflected off of a celestial body, typically a moon. So overall, while it seems that Blutz Waves seem to be benign radiation for most species, the ones that it does affect, it seems to be pretty intense. Just like how in real life we have different ways to measure radiation, there's also a way that they measure Blutz Waves in Dragon Ball. They get measured in zenos per second. Not that zeno, but yes, zenos per second. Now it seems on average the highest a celestial body will be able to emit is around 17 million zenos per second. Now that does sound like a lot, but it's also caveated that you're not going to get to that level or higher without being full, which I assume means a fully unobstructed view of the moon, as well as the light getting to the moon is unobstructed. It's said celestial bodies in general in some places, but also just the moon in others. But we know it's not just the moon that can do it. There can be artificial sources, and in GT we see Goku use the Earth as a moon. Not only that, we see Bulma be able to create an artificial generator of Blutz Waves as well. So we know that this is a recreatable phenomenon that doesn't purely have to happen from sunlight bouncing off of the moon. Another thing to note about Zenos is the primary means of absorption is through the retinas. So without looking at the actual source, you're not really going to absorb much Blutz Waves. So, whenever a Saiyan absorbs 17 million Zenos, a gland in their tail reacts to the radiation absorbed by their eyes in order to mutate them into a giant great ape. That feels weird to me. That's weird, right? The fact that the eyes connect to the tail like that? However, this reaction occurring in the tail is the exact same reason why the removal of one will stop a Saiyan. However, as we also see in GT, if someone doesn't have a tail but is still exposed to enough Blutz Waves, the reaction can be caused in their body anyways. Also, since Wolfmen transform by looking at the moon, I wonder if lycanthropes canonically have an organ in their body that has a reaction to Zenos, or if that's just me overthinking things. Our favorite blue-haired baddie decided to start messing around with Blutz Waves and accidentally created the most potent generator of the substance the universe has ever seen. As a result, the unnatural limits of what can happen with Blutz Waves really get explored and shown. It seems that increasing levels of Blutz Waves result in various effects, be they good or bad. Get a pretty high dose, you can turn someone from a Saiyan to a human when they absorb it through their eyes. Even higher, they don't need to have the tail or be looking at the source. get it even higher, it's implied multiple times that it kind of helps the healing factor of sands, especially while in the Ozaru form.
The only way to revive him is with the Blutz Wave amplifier. I just hope it works as well as last time. It has to.
How can this be? I'm filling up with power, growing stronger.
But this scale quickly tips into the danger category.
Down permanently?
No, something's different here. Look at his eyes, would you? There's a strange energy there. I've got it. He went through such an unnatural way of achieving his gorilla form that it may be causing some adverse effects.
However, it's also interesting to think about that if enough forced Blutz Waves can make a sand transform even without a tail, what would happen exposing other species to this insanely high dose of Blutz Waves? I feel like there's a chance that we could find more transformations of more species if this happened in Dragon Ball. One day we'll find out that some other race can turn into giant frogs. Who knows? So, like, you guys are starting to get where I'm coming from, right? The moon is, like, alive, but it's not alive, and, like, it keeps getting destroyed, but being brought back. It can sustain life, but it's just the moon, it's just an asteroid, and it doesn't control the tides, but it should control the tides. A generator, or a hologram, or key. It makes no sense. I was really hoping at the start of doing this that I would find more answers and would be less scared and confused of the moon. However, over the course of researching and taking notes and recording this video, I think I'm only more confused and scared of the moon than I ever have been before. Not only that, I have like way more questions than answers. Where like, can a blind Sam still transform if they look at the moon? Like, will the retina still absorb the radiation? Or does it need to go through the optic nerve and like get processed some way as well? But it just take like more Zenos to get through it. Also, in GT, when the Earth acted as a moon for Goku's transformation, does that also mean that all the werewolves on Earth, if they looked up and saw the Earth in that moment, would have also transformed? Also, what if a Saiyan, or a half Saiyan, was bitten by a werewolf, and then became a werewolf? When it looks at the full moon, would it become a wolf monkey? I think it would become a wolf monkey. And another thing that I thought about is like, theoretically, couldn't Cell have his own Great Ape form? Because like, he has the DNA of a bunch of Saiyans in him, and he technically has a tail. He's able to achieve a lot of other feats that the Z fighters can pull off, including the Saiyans' unique stuff. So, I kind of think there's a chance for a Great Ape Cell at some point. Although with the addition of Cell Max, we don't need another big cell. And like, if there were multiple moons in the sky, would that give more Zenos? So a transformation could be performed sooner than a full moon? Okay, so what does this all mean? I don't know. See you guys next time.